Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Ma'rifat and I'm from AG4. And in this video, I would like to discuss about the reason for studying discourse analysis, the genesis of discourse analysis NELT, and the scope of discourse analysis or interactional speaking. This in line with the opinion of Wood 2014, which states that through discourse analysis, students can engage with study of how in social interaction human convey meaning not as an individualistic endeavor but as a result of dynamic and ongoing negotiations with interlocutor. So, for academic discussion analysis will be very useful for students to gain knowledge and understanding of the function of language in social life and the role of language in the construction and information of social relationship. And the next, pragmatic reason. For pragmatic reasons, discourse analysis plays a major role in providing information on the language functions that exist in the expression used by native English speakers in their real lives. This information, as one of the results of discourse analysis, will certainly provide knowledge about language function in the context of language, which is expected to minimize pragmatic difficulties and enable learners to use English naturally, both in speaking and writing. Therefore, the information gathered through discourse analysis will be very helpful for informed learners about the linguistic feature of language used in real-life context. Now, how language should be used to communicate with each other. Identify the most appropriate use of language to communicate. First, we must know what pedagogy. So, pedagogy is the science of art of being a teacher. This term refers to learning strategies or learning styles. Pedagogy also sometimes refers to the proper use of teaching strategies. Discourse analysis itself has a close relationship with language teaching and learning, both foreign and second language teaching. Kadir, 2016, point out that the close relationship between discourse analysis and foreign language education is very simple. Discourse analysis is concerned with language used in real communicative situations, and so is foreign language education. Therefore, the information about language use obtained by discourse analysis has become an inspiration for teachers and language practitioners who they use a reference search for formulating curricula, designing syllabus, preparing teacher materials, and determining language teaching method. And the next discussion about the genesis of discourse analysis. First, traditional grammar theory. Traditional grammar constitutes a theory of grammar study which was introduced and developed by 18th and 19th century in Europe. Example, the concept is found somewhat different from the concept of grammar in modern linguistics. Study in which grammar is defined as the study of the whole interlaid system available in the structure of sentence in a particular language. Example, sounds, words, phrases, sentence, as well as meanings. The main principle promoted by the theory is that the grammar is this traditional reflect the perspective view that one dialect or variety of a language is to be valued more highly than other and should be the norm for us speakers of the language. And the next, structuralism theory. They began to look for an alternative theory to language study and this took them out to find the structuralism theory. The term structuralism was firstly introduced by a Swiss linguist, Ferdinand de Saussure, who developed a branch of linguistic theory called structural linguistics through his course in general linguistics published in 1916. This theory focused on examining language as a static system of interconnect units. Basically, the teaching method developed based on the theory of structuralism also consider that the cultural aspect of the language is important to examine and thence it as an integral part in the lives of native speakers of the target language. The next, functional theory. Functionalism theory is known as an approach to language study that is concerned with studying the function performed by language use. The primary principle of this theory has been pushed many research to examine aspects of the language function beside the language form. This is done by analyzing the language discourse of both oral and written to find the purpose behind the use of sustained utterance in communication. The next discussion is discourse analysis and ELT. The first, the concept of discourse. Based on the identification in the book entitled Discourse Analysis for English Language Teaching, it can be concluded there are three similar concepts that can be used to formulate other definitions that represent the shared component of the definition, namely a linguistic process such as communication, linguistic behavior, continuous expansion of speech, continuous expansion of language, use of language. B. Linguistic products, for example, speech, writing, spoken, writing text, sentence, linguistic expression. C. Linguistic qualities, such as well-formed and coherent grammatical, which there's three similar concepts. The definition of discourse is then formulated as the use of coherent linguistic expression, both speech and other text for communication. 2. The concept of discourse analysis. After understanding the concept of discourse, then understand the concept of discourse analysis. This discussion will present information about the concept of discourse analysis resulting from a literature search. Two of them are from wikipedia.com, which explain that discourse analysis or discourse as study is a general term for a number of approach the analysis the use of written language, vowels or signs or significant semiotic event. Then from Woods, 2014, discourse analysis is often defined as the use of language about the sentence level, giving students the opportunity to study the production and interpretation of meaningful text and speech. Of all these definitions, there are at least four important components that can be used a basis for understanding the concept of discourse analysis more easily, namely A. Linguistic analysis to analyze. Attempt to study, opportunity to learn, to describe, to identify. B. Linguistic process, language use and language organization. C. Linguistic product, written text, oral interaction, interpretation of text and speech, language form, language function. D. Linguistic quality, meaningful, significant. Up to this point, it is clear that students studying discourse analysis must conduct discourse analysis according to Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary. Analysis is the careful study of something in order to study its parts, what they do, and how they are related to one another. In the other words, students are required to carry out a careful study Study of language used to study the part of the language. Example, form and function, what they do in language, and how they relate to each other to form meaning in language. 3. Concept of English language. Teaching given the description of discourse and discourse analysis. The next important thing to understand is the concept of teaching English. To understand the definition of teaching English, we must first understand the definition of teaching. There are at least two ways to can be used to determine of the definition of teaching. The first way is to look up the meaning of the term in the dictionary and identify its use in social life. The second way is to observe what the so-called teacher do in teaching, then describe the tasks and activities carried out, and finally make an interpretation of the task and activity to clearly describe the meaning of the teaching. 4. Relationship between discourse analysis and NELT according to Mitib MA 2010. Most English teachers tend to teach their students English partly from its use. As a result, knowledge of context is lacking, and when it is time to practice the things they have learned in class in real-life interactions, students have difficulty using socially appropriate language, and it is difficult to recognize language functions. Youth range addressed by native English speakers. In other words, they can speak grammatically correct English but fail to speak naturally understandable English. Such situations often create pragmatic difficulties to make the interlocutor uncomfortable. In Indonesia, many English students face the same problem. This happens because students receive a lot of input in the form of English, but lack in English function. To shift the orientation of teacher in teaching, serious effort need to be made. This can be started by suggesting English teachers to study discourse analysis, because discourse analysis is able to provide information about how native English speakers use English to interact and communicate in their actual social life. And the next discussion is the scope of discourse analysis or interactional speaking. Human life is surrounded by message. Every day, we see messages there that are passed from one person to other or other person through speech. Example, conversation, discussion, lecture, speech, and announcement. And writing, for example, short message, email, newspaper, magazine, comic, stories, and much more. Messages are usually delivered with the aim of communicating a specific purpose and a specific function. However, the purpose of function the message was not disclosed by the recipient due to difference in background, language, and cultural knowledge. Then the task of discourse analysis is to find and explain the hidden function and purpose in the message communicated in written text and oral interactions. Speaking as a common interaction is found is our actual social life in terms of dialogue of interpersonal conversation, because speaking performs as interactional function. This type of speaking is also known as interactional speaking, called interactional for several reasons, namely mainly to build social interaction, focus on meeting the social needs of participants, and be interactive and require two-way participation. Interactional speaking can clearly be described as two or more people meeting somewhere. They will exchange greetings, engage in small talk, share recent experience, and so on. One example of conversation as oral discourse is in the classroom, which is also known as class conversation. In this conversation, students are expected to raise their hand first if they want to say something. Sinclair and Coulthard, 1917-5, show that classroom discourse basically has a tripartite structure. The teacher initiates, the student responds, the teacher then evaluates the response. If a teacher withholds feedback, students take this as a signal that the response was wrong and try again. Conversation in classroom for some language practitioners is considered a special variety of language used by each person and student in their interaction. This is due and to its own specific feature that other varieties do not have. The limited physical context, especially participant and the purpose of the interaction have made classroom conversations have a style of its own. For example, in trying to communicate with students, the teacher often simply their speech by giving many characteristics of foreign speech and other simplistic styles of speech aimed at language learner. In addition, we need to understand the conducting discourse analysis for conversation in class is still very important and useful for three main purposes, namely, A, to show its characteristic in terms of structure, function, and so on, which distinguish it from ordinary conversation, encourage students to recognize and use a characteristic when they are in a classroom environment and when to engage in conversation in it, to see what happens in the classroom and to evaluate the end product of our teaching and that of our students. According to speech act theory, class conversation is a speech situation consisting of one or more speech events with different functions such as commissive, declarative, directive, expressive, and representative. Al-Gharawi, 2005. Sinclair and Coulthard found a pattern called the ERV sequence from analyzing conversation between the teachers and students. The pattern showed that native speaker class conversation usually occur in the following order. I stand for initiation. Teacher initiates a conversation. F stand for feedback. Teachers follow up. R response. Students purpose. Analyzing of discourse data encourages students to reflect upon and critically evaluate knowledge acquired in the study. For example, syntax and semantics as well as natural drawing students in the investigation of socially situated language use. I think that's all our discussion today. Thank you very much for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.